This is episode number 74 with New York Times bestselling author Tim Sanders. Hello, everyone. I'm Julian Placino, and welcome to the Pathways to Success podcast, where I interview experts on leadership, personal development, business, health and fitness, and many other topics to help you find your unique pathway to success. Having a deep recruiting background, I leverage my ability to attract top performers and conduct in-depth interviews to uncover the secrets to success from a highly diverse group of experts, then share these lessons to help you find your unique pathway to success. Thanks for tuning in, and I'm looking forward to connecting with you soon on the Pathways to Success. This episode is brought to you by CompeteEveryday.com, a global lifestyle brand that provides competitors everywhere the positive motivation to take on their greatest obstacles and compete for their life. Now, this is a very unique sponsor because when you look at their products, they're kind of this perfect blend of motivational messaging and high-quality fitness and lifestyle apparel. So they have t-shirts, hoodies, joggers, tank tops, shorts for men and women that display inspiring messaging like be a difference maker, beat yesterday, raise the bar, end on empty, and my personal favorite, compete hard, dig deep, kick ass, repeat. And there's even some funny ones like their Do Not Judge Me tee, where the O is in the shape of a donut, because Jake Thompson, the owner of Compete, has a fascination with donuts. So there's something here for everyone. I highly encourage you to check them out. I'm going to spell this out for you. That's CompeteEveryday.com, CompeteEveryday.com. And if you use the code Julian, that's Julian, my name, you get 10% off your order. So make sure to check them out at CompeteEveryday.com today. What's happening, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Pathways to Success podcast. And I gotta say, I'm just super humbled and grateful to have had the guest I had on the show this week, which is Tim Sanders. And Tim is a New York Times bestselling author. He has spoken to hundreds, if not thousands, of audiences all around the world, serving so many different kinds of companies and individuals. And today we're going to be really unpacking his New York Times bestseller, Love is the Killer App, How to Win Business and Influence Friends. And we talk about the core ideas and philosophies behind the book, how love is truly transformative in your personal as well as your business life, what is a love cat, secrets to networking, and so much more. You guys are absolutely going to love this episode, so make sure to share it out with everyone that you know. So tune in, take notes, and on to the interview. Welcome everyone back to another episode of the Pathways to Success podcast. I am super excited about the guest I have on the show. And his name is Tim Sanders, and Tim spent most of his early career on the cutting edge of innovation and change. He was an early stage member of Mark Cuban's Broadcast.com, which had the largest opening day IPO in history. After Yahoo acquired the company, Tim was tapped to lead their ValueLab. And by 2001, he rose to Chief Solutions Officer. In 2005, he founded Deeper Media, which provides consulting services for leading brands. And today, he's one of the top-rated speakers on the lecture circuit. Tim is the author of 4 books, including the New York Times bestseller, Love is the Killer App, How to Win Business and Influence Friends, which has been translated into over a dozen languages and has been featured in Fast Company, USA Today, the New York Times, the Boston Globe, Christian Science Monitor, and on CNN. He's a master storyteller who offers listeners actionable takeaways that produce results right away. And that's why he's one of the top speakers on the lecture circuit. So it's my pleasure to welcome Tim Sanders. Welcome to the Pathways to Success podcast. How are you?
I'm doing great, Julian. Glad to be with you.
Yeah. You know, Tim, I have to admit, the first time I ever heard of you was in 2003 in my Marketing 101 class. And Dr. Strutton, who was my professor at the time, he said, everyone has to read this book. This is required reading outside of the textbook. And I graduated from UNT out here in North Texas. Of course, since I was a terrible student, I didn't read the book. But 17 years later, our paths cross again, and I've read the book. I love it, and I'm just so excited to have you on the podcast, Tim.
Well, I'm glad to be with you. I'm glad to be with you, Julian.
So, Tim, I guess, going into this book, and I want to discuss and unpack the value that people would get from it, what was your goal in writing this book?
That's a really good question. So, I didn't intend to write Love is the Killer App. It kind of happened. What happened, Julian, is that somewhere around 1997, I made a discovery, and it changed my paradigm. And when I started to act on this discovery, everything in my career changed. I went from just kind of moving sideways from one sales manager job to the next, to starting to really move up in the world. And the doors started to open wide. And between 1997 and 2001, I went from inside sales rep at Mark Cuban's startup to the chief solutions officer at Yahoo, purely by employing a really simple system of relationship development, the way I thought about how I did business. So what happened was, I had started to do a lot of presentations on behalf of broadcast.com, and I would always finish my presentation with a discussion about love and about what it meant to bring the love to work and why it will make a difference in your life. And I also started to build a training program that by 2000, when I landed at Yahoo, I started to implement for the different salespeople that were in our organization. A literary agent in Dallas named Jan Miller was referred to me by a person who manages professional speakers. And she'd seen me do one of my speeches, and she said, Jan, you should meet this guy. So Jan came to my event and heard me do my bit on love, and she comes up afterwards and she's like, darling, there's a book here. This is a good idea for a book. And I said, well, I'm not an author. And she says, no, we don't even think about it. She goes, I discovered Stephen Covey Sr. I discovered Phil McGraw, Deepak Chopra. She goes, I was Tony Robbins' agent from when he lived in an apartment in San Diego. You're gonna write this book. And so that set me on a journey. And 2 years later, on Valentine's Day 2002, Love is the Killer app wasn't just a training program for young yahoos anymore. It was a book. And since then, Julian, I've had an opportunity to speak probably 700 times across the world to different groups across many cultures about this very simple idea that if you want to be successful, you've got to arm yourself or equip yourself to make other people successful and be willing to give it away and expect nothing in return. And that's hard.
Wow. Well, I deeply appreciate that for many reasons, but I'm curious. So where did these ideas and philosophies of love come from?
Good question. So I did write a follow-up book. It's called Today We Are Rich. It's my fourth book. It's a Christian book. It's not as well known as Love is the Killer app, but it explains my childhood. So I was raised on a farm by my grandmother. I was a special education student until sixth grade. And as a result, you can imagine, Julian, I got picked on a lot. I had a lot of coping mechanisms, and even as a kid, I learned that the secret to dealing with bullies is to love them because no one else does. And that if you can be the one person in the world that cares about the bully will become your best friend. And sure as shooting, those same bullies that bloodied my shirt on picture day in the seventh grade put out posters for me when I successfully ran for senior class president, in a real turnaround of childhood, real turnaround for me. And I think that's where love at school, love in society, love out in public became part of my MO. I always tried to help people. So what happened, though, was, I graduate from college and I go to work, and, in the average working environment, your boss would tell you, dude, you're too nice to be successful. People are going to run over you, right? So I heard that. I was in television advertising. Eventually, I worked for Pat Summerall, Pat, at his studios. So I wasn't ever in an environment where love was considered a good attribute at work. It was considered a weakness. It was considered a diversion. It was considered a very soft way of thinking about the world. Then finally, everything aligns. 1996, one night I'm laying in bed reading Napoleon Hill, which I'd read when I was a kid growing up because my grandmother was really into all those old motivational books. But Napoleon Hill challenged me to think about those championship years, like my turnaround years at the end of high school, and to think about the things that I was doing then that made a difference, and that if I wanted to be successful like that, I need to do those again. And then I read very, very next month Stephen Covey's 7 Habits for the first time. And Stephen Covey really impressed upon me that there's so many people in the world that have this scarcity mindset where they believe there's not enough to go around, and that there's a chosen few that develop this abundance mentality, which comes from a deep sense of self-worth, that there is enough to go around, enough to share. And I remember just shutting the book and saying, from now on, I'm going to think bigger. And I think that when I give away information and knowledge, there's enough to share, and that the more I give, the more I get. And it was a huge paradigm shift. So then, just a few months later, my wife has a client, she's a hairdresser at the time, who's an investor. in Mark Cuban's startup. Broadcast. It's called AudioNet at the time. It became broadcast.com. And he said, Tim should go to work for Mark. And so I did my research and I went to work for Mark, and a couple of things happened. First day on the job, there's a poster on the back of the wall which had Mark's mantra. And it wasn't a big thing. It was just a little thing, but it was a cue for me. And the poster said, "Make love, not war." And Mark's philosophy was that we should love our customers by listening to what they want and giving it to them and not debating them, because everybody else wants to debate them to be more profitable. He created an environment that empowered us to tear up an invoice if a client was anything less than happy. He challenged us to get on the phone and be accountable in real time in less than 2 minutes, the 2-minute rule. When someone sends us an email and says, "We're not happy with your service." I'd never, Julian, worked at a company that truly put love at the center of the table. Well, that unleashed me. And so then everything I'd always believed about, how can I show the love at work kind of came to fruition. And so, they started to give me a lot of opportunities to go out and evangelize the future of the internet, and most of all, mentor customers of ours like Neiman Marcus, in Dallas. That's a big deal. But that was one of our first customers for retail broadcast. I got to spend a lot of time with them, all the way up to former chairman Stanley Marcus Jr., even as a junior sales guy, sharing knowledge to promote their understanding of what was coming next. So the thing Mark taught me was, if you want to be successful, you need to become a student. You need to master the game. You need to know the future before the future happens. And by the way, it's in the bookstore. And when you go to meetings, don't carry swag like all these other cats like AOL are doing. Bring a book that you read on behalf of your prospect or customer, and that's going to change the game. And that's where the Love is the Killer App system really started.
Wow. That's a great story. So it seems like love is really where this philosophy here kind of stems from. And I think you're right. I think that word is kind of like sort of interpreted a lot of different ways. But how do you personally define love in the context of how it's transformed your life?
Well, I'm the kind of guy that researches things to death. For those of you that watch TV, my wife always calls me Sheldon Cooper. Dr. Sheldon Cooper, as in Big Bang Theory. So I'm the kind of guy that looks everything up. So, I started to use the word love a lot because I was deeply influenced by a writer named Leo Buscaglia. Leo Buscaglia was a professor at NYU. You might have heard of him. He was the guy that gave free hugs out. He was the first guy that, after a lecture, you could go up and get a free hug from him. He's this big, huge, raucous Italian guy, wonderful writer. He wrote a book called Love. And in the book, he says, you want to be the greatest. It's something you can give away. He says the only difference between family and friends is family has to take you in. He had all these great philosophies, but the way he thought about love was beautiful. He thought that love is the only reason we're alive. He thought that human beings are born with their arms reaching out to be hugged, and that it is natural for us to love. And he challenged us, don't compartmentalize love. And I really believe that. I believe that you don't leave love in the trunk of your car. You don't leave it in your apartment. You take it to work because between 9 and 5 is not the valley of the dead. It's the valley of the alive. And love makes the difference. And I love the word because the word is either unifying or divisive. Take your pick. So I stuck with love. So I did a lot of research on what it means to love someone. And one of the synonyms, of course, of love is to care about a person, which is really what it's about. There's a writer, a philosopher, psychologist, contemporary of Abraham Maslow. His name is Milton Meyerhoff, and he wrote a beautiful book called On Caring, and it's a real exploration of what it means to care about someone. So he defined love or caring as one's selfless commitment to promote happiness and growth in the other. And the best way to think about that is a mom and her daughter, or a father and his son, or a very compassionate teacher and her student. Those are really good examples of what Milton Meyerhoff is talking about. I am selfless in my commitment to promote your happiness and your growth as a human being. And I express it in many sorts of ways, but I have a feeling, and that feeling is a commitment. It is an emotional situation. Now, when I read that, I thought that's great. But I'd been in business for a long time, and I've always been business-centric. I studied business in college. I think a lot about the balance that we have as employees between keeping the lights on and following our purpose. So I knew that there had to be some modification of the definition of love in a professional context, given the fact that we all have a social contract to serve the organization as much as we serve ourselves, right? So it can't be selfless. So when I thought about it, it's really about this business love, or you've read the book, I call it biz love, because I was like crazy back in like 97, 2000. I was like Austin Powers, in terms of my cry. I wore sunglasses all the time. I had big sideburns, I mean, it was just crazy at the time. So biz love is defined as one's intelligent sharing of their intangibles, their knowledge, their network, their compassion, to promote success and growth in the other person, whether that other person is a colleague, whether the other person is a customer, whether that other person is a partner, and dude, whether that other person is your boss. You have a feeling inside yourself where you say, I am committed to promote their success, and I will intelligently share my knowledge, my network, and compassion, because I formed a philosophy through experience that nice, smart people succeed. Nice people get run over. So the key is technique. How do you intelligently share knowledge? What's your technique? How do you intelligently share your network of relationships, understanding that your network is your net worth? How do you share your compassion in a way that doesn't cause you to have a 1-inch thick HR folder about you, right? So when people say, I tried to be nice and it got me in trouble, I say you need to work on your technique, because that's something I thought a lot about, not just when I wrote Love is the Killer app, but in the years since, where I've traveled to every major continent. And I've seen multiple cultures, from Saudi Arabia to Brazil to Chile to Norway, integrate Love is the Killer app. And I received tremendous feedback that has helped me sharpen the technique of sharing knowledge, network, and compassion in the pursuit of promoting someone's success.
Love it. Love it. So Tim, the book really is about sort of defining what you have coined a love cat. What is a love cat, and why should people consider becoming one and getting benefit from that?
I wish I had rights to this Cure song, because we'd be like playing it right now. We move like cagey tigers, but no two can get closer than this. That line from the Cure's song Love Cats really struck me as I was writing the book. I had heard Love Cat as a reference to Herb Kelleher. You know Herb. Ex-attorney, 1973, writes down a plane route on the back of a napkin, which launches Southwest Airlines. The stock ticker for the company's LUV. Their first marketing motto was "Somebody up there loves you." Somebody referred to Herb Kelleher as a tough old love cat. And I said, yes, this is the archetype of what I want to write about. A love cat is a person that has a deep desire to love other people. Big difference than a deep desire to be loved, right? Abraham Maslow talked about the difference between deficiency love, D-love, and being love, B-love. B-love is when you want to love other people. You can't help yourself. It's a way you find peace and satisfaction. That's what a love cat has. So the love cat has a deep desire to love others. The love cat strategically and effectively create success in other people as a pathway to create their own success. Meaning the love cat says, I cannot succeed without producing success in others. If I don't strengthen my own ecosystem, I will strangle from a lack of oxygen. Oh, now cue up Love is Oxygen. Right? Just kidding. But so the love cat, it's a personality type, and I think you've worked with them before in your life. We'll get back to that great teacher you had. You might have had a mentor at work who really took you under her wing. She really cared about you, and you wonder why she cared. She cared because that's who she was. And the reason she was a love cat fundamentally was she also held you accountable to learn. So I tell people all the time, if you're struggling with this idea of bringing love to work, it feels just wrong. It feels like people are going to misunderstand you. There's a big difference between the kind of love that your grandmother has for you and the kind of love your college roommate has for you. There's a huge difference, Julian. You know what it is? Accountability. Your grandmother will do anything for you, but she will take you out behind the woodshed if you make repeat errors that need to be corrected. If she teaches you something, she's going to expect you to learn it and apply it correctly. Your college roommate's not going to do that. Your college roommate just wants you to be happy around them and to keep calling them and to stay in contact. They'll look the other way. They'll let things slide. That's why love can get a bad rap, because we kind of misunderstand the different types of love. And I say, bring that familial love to the work situation and you'll never go wrong.
Who do you think, besides yourself, of course, in the public arena, exemplifies a love cat?
Well, it's really hard because everybody, will recouch, everybody in the public arena. But let me just kind of give you some examples, off the top of my head. So, and these are all going to feel kind of nichey, but in my personal experience, I've found Bono to be a real love cat because he really has gone out of his way to figure out how he can make a difference, not just with his music, but with his money, with his fame, with his popularity. So he's always been kind of a natural giver. And the people I've talked to that have been at events where he's spoken before too, because he does that, always say that he was the kind of person who just really wants to help. He was actually an interesting guy that always wants to introduce somebody to somebody that he knows, and like he knows the Dalai Lama, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a good example. From CEOs, Richard Branson has a really good reputation of being a love cat, the kind of guy who just really cares about people and has made it a design challenge to care about them greatly and run a successful business and make that part of the culture of the organization. In professional sports, I think Abby Wambach, the championship women's soccer player, has been a real love cat. She's spending her post-soccer career out promoting equal pay for women. She made a lot of sacrifices. She does a lot of free lectures to mentor women about how to stand up for equal pay. I had a chance to meet her recently. I really thought that she had a lot of those attributes that I talk about all the time. She has that natural tendency to put people together that should meet. She's a hugger, which not everybody is in the world. So that's a good example in the world of sports. I could go on, but you kind of get the idea of the kind of personalities. And so, I think the key here is to look for that person who finds it a delightful challenge to help other people succeed in the face of the reality of the world we live in today.
Love it. Tim, one of the reasons why I deeply appreciated your book, and I wasn't just saying that, was because the philosophies that you wrote about in this book, years ago, I have come to discover throughout my own path. And that was through, for some reason, serving others without the expectation of others, with anything in return. I seem to sort of benefit in indirect ways. But for the person who's still kind of skeptical about this idea of love in the business context, do you think you can draw correlation or causation from the amount of love you give out commensurate to the profit that they make in their business?
I don't know about saying profit, but what we have been able to measure, and Google did a really good study on this about what it takes for a leader to be successful, and that was to be compassionate, to be empathetic. And there's a resource later we're going to talk about, and that Google study will be there for you to look at to see, the kind of KPIs I guess most people care about, like productivity of people that you lead. That's a good example. Here's what happens. If I care about you and I promote your success, and I never call in the favor, which means I don't take that out of the emotional bank account by saying you owe me, then you have a feeling towards me. And that feeling fundamentally is a mixture of trust and loyalty. So you have a lot of trust in what I say moving forward, so I have the ability to really influence you. And you have a lot of loyalty to our shared vision. You don't necessarily have loyalty to me because you still got your own needs, but you certainly have loyalty to those connected needs that we both have. And that's really important to me to lead you. What we do know is that in businesses like, say, real estate or financial advice, where it's a professional service, it's very referral driven, a highly generous professional will get more referrals of a higher quality. They will have a lower cost of acquisition for new clients because they're building a brand that literally goes viral in a community. And I'll give you an example later when we talk about networking to illustrate exactly how the science of goodwill works. But the bottom line is you build a brand as a person that everybody wants to do business with. You build a brand as a person that is truly there for you and not there to make a swap of value. And I think that since you lead with knowledge sharing and you are committed to gathering deep insights to give away, you are the kind of person everybody says, you got to meet Julian. And if I had to point to the reason I got those promotions, and I mean, dude, it was like inside sales rep, account executive, business development manager. Then I go to Yahoo, director of the think tank, VP of promotions, SVP of promotions, chief solutions officer. All those things happen. Boom, 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 because I was getting in front of CEOs across the world, ex-presidents of different countries, to talk to them about the future of the internet, and I had outgrown my job title. It kept happening over and over again. We can't have a director level guy meet with the chairman of Sony. We need to promote him to VP. We can't have just a VP guy meeting with the CEO of Coke. We need to promote him to SVP. We can't have just an SVP meeting with the ex-president about politics. So what happened was, as the doors swing open and you get put in front of more and more powerful people, power is given to you. And I think that at a personal level, that's what I've seen happen in the thousands of people's lives who've communicated with me over the years. They read that book and put it to work for them.
Wow. Well, let's jump into that. As you know, Tim, I come from a recruiting and staffing background from my corporate life. And if there was any one profession that's really dialed in the importance of networking, it's this one that I've stemmed from. So I guess I'm curious, given your experience in the philosophies of the book, can you give us some tacticals on how people can effectively grow their network?
Absolutely. So it's really important to understand the difference between being a networker and a super connector. Okay? A networker treats networking as either prospecting or brokering. Okay? So the networker sees networking as a provision activity, an activity to gain. So you say, I am prospecting as a networker to find people I need to meet, to create opportunities, in your case, an SRG, to find new talent to place, or maybe to find new clients that need talent, right? So you're always out there prospecting. Or say you've got a pretty good Rolodex going and you're playing around in your local startup community hoping to get some shares, some friends and family, or some board advisory positions. You're out, quote, networking because you want to broker your network to other people to gain. Okay, those people stink. They're not bad because you need prospectors and brokers in the world, but they're not networkers. That's why a lot of times people are like, I don't want to go to that networking event. Why? Because you feel like you're being mauled. Everybody comes up and looks at your badge and says, what do you do? And then they kind of screen you. And once they think you have value for them, they might dangle a carrot in front of you, but really you're getting worked over. It's like speed dating, but everybody's ugly. You know what I mean? So the issue then is that if you approach networking that way, you'll get something out of it, just like cold calling. But it's not the opportunity. It's not the thing that'll change your life. The super connector is different. The super connector only wants to introduce people that should meet to create value and then disappear. That's their method of operation. So their goal is to find people that should meet, to pair them based on opportunity, personality, to fuse the connection, make sure they're engaged, and to never expect anything in return, because that's highly distracting. Think about it like, I talked about this in the book. You know, e-commerce took away so much friction, all the middleman, all the extra costs. And when a person introduces you to somebody else and they expect you to cut them in on the upside, they are creating friction, which means you don't always trust them. It means you don't always follow up on them. And most importantly, Julian, you don't feel very good about the whole thing. You feel a little bit used. You feel like you owe somebody something. And, you know, I've always believed that business love means never having to say you owe me. Okay. Yeah. So as a networker, then what you want to do then is look strategically at the playing field, ask different questions, which we'll talk about in just a minute, and then make it a game. There's a wonderful book. We'll have a link to it on the resource page. It's called Try Giving Yourself Away. And it was written in the 1930s. It's about a guy who developed a hobby of giving himself away. It was a hobby. He didn't expect anything from it. He did it like people built model trains. Of course, it changed his life, made him a multimillionaire, made him an incredibly happy person. Try giving your network away intelligently. So I'll tell you a story. In life insurance, they talk about this guy named Elmer Letterman. For those of you on the Google, that's Letterman with one T. Elmer Letterman started a life insurance firm back in the 30s, and you can imagine it was really hard to find new customers and sell life insurance during the Great Depression, right? So Letterman came up with this idea, and it later became the Letterman Lunch. And what he would do is he would spend the first part of the week prospecting to find 3 people or 2 people that should meet. A typical Letterman Lunch would have 3 guests besides him. For example, maybe he would invite a chef that he knew who the restaurant shut down during the Depression, but the chef has a new idea for a new restaurant with a new menu in a new part of town cheap rent, other great chefs lined up. That'd be the star of one of his lunches. And then he'd think about the missing pieces, right? So then he'd go find someone who's actually making investments in restaurants, because there were actually investors in the Great Depression who found opportunities. So he'd bring that person. Then he'd go finish the lunch invitations off by inviting someone who's a construction executive with a specialty in finishing out restaurants on time, under budget. So that would be a typical Letterman lunch. And he'd talk about their mutual desires and benefits, lend credibility to the three, get them talking about the opportunity. And then at the end of the lunch, he'd pay the bill and leave. And he would never bring brochures. He never sold anything at any of the lunches. Somebody could look at him during the lunch out of gratitude, for the opportunity, and say, hey, Elmer, I've always been meaning to buy a policy. And he'd say, you can talk to my partner about that next week. Focus on this opportunity. He could come to the opening of the chef's restaurant a year later with a line around the block, and famously, he would never expect a free meal. He wouldn't even expect to cut in line. When he would shake the chef's hand at the front door, he would ask him, how did you do it? And that's the secret, Jillian. The real super connectors of the world have humility about what they do. They understand that when they introduce people that should meet, it is literally one step of an arduous journey to get something built, to get something done in this world. So I think if you take Letterman's approach, you'll experience Letterman's results. Because see, he does this 50 weeks out of the year, and 10 years later in the 1940s, he's a multimillionaire. His company still exists to this day. And when I read about this in a beautiful book called The Masters of Networking by Ivan Meisner, Meisner posits the idea that, all you got to do is the math of goodwill, right? You take three people, you put them together, you expect nothing in return, you show absolute humility, which generates nothing but goodwill. You do it 50 times a year in the same market. You compound that over 10 years. What do you have? You have a stronghold of endless referrals, right? Mm-hmm. So goodwill is the original viral marketing, and networking is your greatest opportunity if you approach it as a super connector. So I'll give you two takeaways from this whole story that I talk about a lot on the lecture circuit. Takeaway number one, you got to ask different questions of people that you meet. I know we cannot resist the what do you do? But remember, that's a screening question. You won't find many great networking opportunities asking that question. The better question is, what are you working on these days that you're excited about? What's your passion project? And then be quiet and let them unpack the story. As a matter of fact, one of the best ways to get someone to tell you more about the story they're telling you is to simply say, tell me more. Resist the temptation to bring the conversation back to you. Don't say, oh, that happened to me, or let me tell you what I'm working on. Shut up. Focus on them. Because what they'll do if you let them talk enough, and if you ask them enough, is they'll take you on that story arc. They'll say, okay, here's the headline. That's usually how they do it. I'm working on this headline. And then they'll say, because of that, to pursue this is the goal. And then all of a sudden, if you hang out a little bit in the conversation, they'll begin to reveal challenges and obstacles and needs. And that is where the networking opportunity reveals itself to you. And you go, oh my gosh, I know a guy that you need to meet. And that's when the magic happens. Either it's going to happen by luck every once in a while, or it's going to happen like every other conversation if you follow my plan. Okay, so the last thing I want to say about this is that if you want to be a networker, you have to be like Letterman. You have to make connecting other people programmatic in your life, not happenstance. Okay, you build the network every single week, one brick at a time, which means you should have a goal of introducing at least 3 people to somebody this week that should meet. 3 people, 3 hookups. I always think of the benefactor and the beneficiary. I'm going to make 3 of those a week by Friday. I live it. I did it this week. I remember scratching out that last one yesterday afternoon. I had a really busy week. Had a lot of things happen this week that were real tough. Had a bad car accident. Had all kinds of things that were very distracting towards that goal. But dude, I wasn't finished on Friday till I made that 3rd connection. So if you make it a goal, you'll become a super connector.
Yeah, I have to say it's I deeply feel where you're coming from, because I have gone through so many networking events where it is about passing out business cards. And I think they go a step further where there's kind of a systematic process of how they kind of pair people, but it was never based on interest. It was sort of done arbitrarily. But your method it's based on getting to know the person, understanding their needs. What is it they're wanting? Because every connection that you make, I think you mentioned this in your book, you said you see people as solutions. Right? Mm-hmm. And when you connect them with other people, it's like you're creating a lot of value for them for very little, execution on your part. So I totally get that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very little execution. The more people you connect, the more people want to connect you. And when you're connected in a way where trust is given up front, not earned on the back end. And you can do so much more with people when they trust you.
Yeah.
Because when they trust you, you trust them back. That's one area where reciprocity really pays off. But you talked earlier about business cards. I still exchange business cards, but again, it's all about technique. It's all about technique. So. Right. So if you give me your business card and we have this conversation and I'm like, you should meet so-and-so, then when I step away from you, and I always have a pen on me, and I always have one of those pens that have the felt tip in case you got a shiny business card so I can write on the back of it. So I write on the back of it, Julian needs to meet Terry Schrader. And I write that on the back of the card and I blow on it so it dries. And then if I told you I'm going to introduce you to Terry, if I made a promise, then I bend over the top right corner of that business card. Then later, when I'm going through business cards, the ones that had the top right corner bent over, those are the promises, and those are the ones I schedule delivering on. Because as Mark Twain apparently said, promises are like babies in a crowded theater. They should be carried out at once.
I mean, right there already, Tim. It's like that's so different than everyone else. When I think of the business cards, I think of just kind of glad handing and like throwing out business cards, just kind of just a numbers game. But yours is different. You put so much thought into it. You fold it over. You have the pen. I don't know anyone who's ever done who I've ever met do that before.
Networking opportunities, they have an expiration date. It's in fact usually shorter than a bottle of milk. Okay, so it's like the person who's got the project today that needs to meet your friend. You know, if you sit on that for 2 or 3 months because you don't have a system, by the time it rolls around, they've met who they need to meet. You have no value to offer. But tomorrow, this networking connection has value. So think about it. That's why we got to have good technique. That's why we have to be methodical. That's why we have to just have these kind of goals for networking, because I'm not the only person who does this. I've met super connectors around the world, and I know them when I meet them. I know them when I meet them. They have the right attitude. They have the right personal system. But most of all, they have key performance indicators. They have metrics. They have goals. They march forward. They treat it like any other part of managing a business. It's not just a fun, nice to do thing. It's critical to their way of producing value in the world. I call it multiplying value too. It's not just adding value. That's like so 1995. Multiplying value is when you change someone's life.
Yeah. And I can draw very direct, correlation in the recruiting world. Overseeing talent for one of the world's premier mobile studios. I have thousands of applicants for every job. Like that's like literally. But I would say 1 out of every 2 hires that we've ever made has been through a referral. We'd like to recruit from the networks of people that we know, love, and trust. And it seems like there's a lot of parallels in that philosophy there. You touched earlier before we started the conversation that this is a topic that you're writing about. Could you unpack just a little bit of that for us, Tim?
Absolutely. So, I think that the secret to long-term success is to love other people that you do business with and to fight cynicism. You can't lead people that you do not love. If you don't hire people that you care about and then treat them like that from day one, you create a bad employer brand, and they go tell their friends. And people are out there looking not for a paycheck, but for a good gig. And especially for millennials, a good gig is a place where you belong, a tribe, a place where we're working together to make a difference in the world. And we have to care about each other in that situation. So as a staffing person, as a recruiter, you need to keep that bleeding heart going. So a few things here. First of all, you need to improve your speed to love. How long does it take for you to care about someone you meet? I find that too many human beings, over the course of our lives, we develop this chasm that we make people cross before we really care about them because we've been burned.
Yeah.
Maybe because we've been working in cultures where that wasn't encouraged. Maybe because we think that makes us more professional, right? So the idea that you meet somebody in college that's your best friend in 5 minutes evaporates 15 years later when you're a stockbroker. That's real. And in the staffing and recruiting world, I did an event recently. They talk about bleeding heart syndrome. So, when you start out in staffing, you have this bleeding heart. It's almost like the Roseanne Barr character, in She-Devil, right, where she starts that staffing firm for women, single women. So she cares so much about them. And they talk about this in your industry. You care about the recruit. You hear about his story. He's been out of a job, but he's really smart. He came from a really bad last job. You knew that company stunk. You want to give him a chance. You're changing his life. You placed him in a great job. You go home. Maybe you tell your partner, man, I changed that guy's life.
Yeah.
And then the next Monday, he doesn't show up. And you get a call from your client going, oh, where's your guy? Breaks your heart, disappoints you. And you say to yourself, I got to stop caring so much about these people. I got to look past all this. And I've got to do a better job at making sure I find people that will actually show up. Well, you have no idea what's happening in that recruit's life. You have no idea. I find so many times, I'm like, if you'll actually go do a postmortem, you'll find that there's a struggle behind that you had no knowledge of. That this mother that you placed at this new job her babysitter for 4 kids, one of which was 18 months, did not show up. Her phone had no minutes on it left to call another human being. There was no payphone in that rundown apartment complex. That's why she missed her job. So for you not to care about people, that hurts you worse than your client and worse than that recruit. So what's really important is that if you want to keep caring about people in the world, you need to assume that people are operating under the best intentions, usually struggling with a problem you have no knowledge about. And if you will adopt that philosophy, you will be able to continue to care in the face of people disappointing you. And sure, there will be those situations where you totally misread somebody, but it gets back to this idea of improving your technique and not giving up on the game. So I think that, whether you're a doctor, whether you're a real estate person that wanted to change people's lives by putting them into homes, whether you're a teacher that wanted to change students' life, don't let one person ruin your outlook, because your outlook is where you get your power. Love is like oxygen. And when you stop wanting to love other people for whatever reason, especially at work, you literally suffocate as a person and cannot be effective.
I love it, man. I'm getting goosebumps just listening to you talk about this stuff because I know I'm saying this. Like, you wrote about this stuff way before I started experiencing it, but it's like you're confirming everything that I intuitively felt about entrepreneurship, about business, about relationships. So thank you for sharing that. So wow.
Absolutely. But you know what I tell you, validations are really important. For those of you that ever want to write a book, there's really only 2 kinds of books in the world to write. There's a book that challenges conventional wisdom, the wrong is right book, Malcolm Gladwell, Freakonomics, Dan Pink, all those guys, really, Adam Grant writes that kind of book. That's a good book because it's really gets everybody's attention. And the other kind of book is the validation book, the you are not alone genre, a really important genre. That's what I wrote a book for. I wrote a book for people that said, I want to be successful without being a jerk. How do we do this? And I said, it's easy. It's about technique, right? I was reading a really good book about writing, and it's not a well-known book, but you can find it on Amazon. It's by Kurt Vonnegut, along with poet Lee Stringer. And the name of the book is called Like Shaking Hands with God. And it's a chance conversation that was recorded in a Brooklyn bookstore between Vonnegut and Stringer. So Vonnegut's talking during this conversation, and he says, sometimes I wonder why I even write books in a world of video games and movies. People want to go watch a movie. They want to play a game. Why do I write books? He says, I write books because I know there are people out there in the world that desperately need to hear the following statement. You are not alone. There is some other crazy person out there that has the same way of seeing the world you do and has the same set of values that you do. You are not alone. And when I read that book and I read that statement, it was like shaking hands with God. I found my purpose, as an author. And I think I write over and over again to validate people who struggle with their good-heartedness but need better technique.
Wow. I have so many more questions to ask you, Tim, but I know our time is running short here and you have a harder stop. Wow. Okay. I'm taking notes here. I'm sorry.
Let's take just a minute to talk about compassion, because I think the last of the 3 ideas is the concept of sharing your compassion, right? Because that's the third intangible that you can give away. And if you give away knowledge first, you develop all this trust. If you give away your network second and do it smart, you develop a lot of loyalty. You develop a lot of interdependence with that person. But when you share your compassion, you make a human connection that artificial intelligence will never touch. When you share your compassion with another person, you produce a more compassionate other person.
Yeah.
You deeply influence that person in the most profound sort of way. And in my world, compassion means, and this is from the Dalai Lama, I'm not Buddhist, but The Art of Happiness really nails it. That's a book. Compassion is your desire that others do not suffer unnecessarily. Compassion is your dream that others find what they're looking for in life. It's a connectedness. It's a feeling I have where I'm actually feeling what you feel, the sympathy, right? But it's also a detachment, like an empathy, where I respect your feelings and I'm willing to do the hard work to see things from your point of view, because it's not just important to me to have a better vision of your world. It's important for you to know that you are not alone. That's why for leaders, empathy is a superpower. Your ability when someone tells you I'm upset, I'm anxious, maybe about something at work and they're vulnerable, your ability to just say, I'm sorry. I can only imagine how you feel. Tell me more. That is a superpower, because so many managers, they don't do it that way, do they? They roll up their sleeves and they say, you shouldn't feel that way. And they give you all these reasons that are smart and they push you away. And that's why I think so many leaders fail to influence and to embrace. So, compassion really is about our commitment, if you will, to the human experience and not just the practical outcomes of making them smarter or connecting them to another solution. And I think it's the hardest thing for us to bring to work. But for those of you that have ever had someone show you real compassion at work, it makes the most profound difference on our lives.
And that one idea, Tim, has transformed my relationship with my wife as well. Because a lot of times when we have conversations, she might be sort of like venting to me about a particular issue, and my natural, my tendency is to fix it. But she doesn't necessarily want me to fix it. She just wants me to listen and empathize with her, and I can see how that's so powerful in business dealings as well. So yeah, I totally believe that.
Well, let me tell you why it's a natural thing. Eckhart Tolle talks about this a lot in The Power of Now. It's like, Julian, when you're a little kid, when you're 5, when you're 4, you don't have that reaction. You're empty on the inside, right?
Right. Yeah.
Your pets. I don't know if you have a dog or a cat. I have a little dog, I have a poodle. When my son went to college, I'm crying. My best friend's telling me, don't feel that way. He's going to graduate. He'll be off the payroll. You're lucky. You get his bedroom. I'm crying. I just not want any to hear. My poodle comes in my lap, puts his head against my lap. He's sad with me for a minute. I feel better. We love kids and pets because they're empty on the inside. They catch feelings. Empathy is their superpower. But what happens? You get full. You got your own problems by the time you're a young adult or an adult or an old adult like me. And as Tolle says, the wall goes up inside you. And it reflects other people's negative and sometimes positive emotions, right? Because by the way, it's just as damning in a relationship when someone's having a joyful moment for you to take away from that. Well, it must be nice. I wish I had that. So it's that wall. And we let things reflect off the wall. So when someone comes to you and they're frustrated and they're venting, you have 2 responses. You shouldn't feel that way, or just let me fix it. We menfolk do that the most often. I will kick his butt, right? So because we don't want to hear it anymore, because it's reflecting off the wall and it's irritating us. It's like we're on an airplane and next to us a woman is holding a beautiful baby that is shrieking, and every shriek is making our head explode. Tolle talks about the idea that, can you practice letting that baby's cry not only hit the wall, but be absorbed by the wall, to be hugged by the wall, to pass through you to the next person. And I practice this all the time in situations where other people are being irritated and I embrace. And if you bring that into your day-to-day relationships, you'll be so much better at creating community where your business partner, your husband, your wife, your best friend, they are not the only person in the world that knows what they're going through. They got somebody else that's actually willing to listen to them. And I'll give you one more little clue here about relationship stuff since we're waxing on this. So I know we've been taught a lot to, from movies like Dead Poet Society or whatever, we've been taught a lot to relate to people where somebody says, well, I went through these things and I lost this job and all this other happened. And then you, like the hero, goes, yes, well, let me tell you what, that happened to me. And they're like, really? That happened to you? And you say, yes. And here's what I did and I survived. And they go, really? Then I'm going to survive. That's a Hollywood motion picture. That is not how it works in the real world, okay? That is not the effective approach. When people are talking about their problems, don't talk about yourself. Don't relate. You can do it later. Like it's great to come back the next day and say, hey, I was thinking about it last night. And I went through something like that. In the moment of the reveal, that vulnerable reveal, make it all about them. Yeah. Tell me more. If you focus the conversation, guess what happens? They have taken that scalpel and cut out the pain. Yeah. Dr. Stephen Covey Sr. wrote a book that few read. It was called The Eighth Habit. I don't know if you ever heard of it. But the eighth habit is the habit to listen without anything to say. And he studied it in relationships. He studied it in arbitration. He found that when the plaintiff feel like she'd been heard completely, they settle. So that's my little extra secret is, don't say that happened to me. Don't say I feel that way too. You can say all that stuff later, but in the moment of reveal, just be there for the other person because the other person just wants to be heard.
I love it. And no matter how successful someone is, no matter how intimidated you are by someone else's accomplishments, that adds value to that person no matter where they are in life, listening to them. Because even there's always I have a tendency to compare myself, which is the worst thing ever. But I've seen that when you do it in a genuine way, you build connection with that person when you really just listen, So I get it. I love it.
It's really rare. I mean, we don't run into those kind of people very much because, again, the Hollywood drilled into us human tendency is to compare, to contribute, it's the A to B, right? And again, while you feel like you're connecting with people, you're shutting them off. Mm-hmm. It's almost like an improv comedy routine where the first person says, well, wait a minute. Yeah, but where'd the banana peel come from? The joke's dead. That's not how you do it. In an improv, it's yes and.
Right. Got it. All right. Well, Tim, a recurring theme that I see in the way that you consume knowledge is you walk away with sort of like a big thought. And first off, the way that you read a book is not the way normal people read a book. You have such an interesting process in the way that you do that. So for our listeners today, what's the big thought you want them to walk away with your book, Love is the Killer App?
The big thought is there is no thing you can do at work that will make you more happy with your work than to love people. Yeah. And if you want to be successful and happy at the same time, love is the strategy for your success. Otherwise, take your pick.
Love it. Love it, love it, love it. Tim, how do people connect with you, follow you, buy your book? Tell us all that if you would.
Well, we've developed a page just for your listeners. It's timsanders.com/pathways. timsanders.com/pathways. And this page will offer you a 5,000-ish word excerpt from Love is the Killer App. It's the one that ran in Fast Company. You'll have ways to connect with me on LinkedIn, and we'll have a couple of other resources there of books you can read. So it's timsanders.com/pathways.
Love it. Love it. Tim, this has been a true pleasure. I was really looking forward to this conversation, and you absolutely over-delivered on every expectation I felt. Well, so thank you for coming on the podcast,
Julian.
Tim.
It's my pleasure to be with you, bud.
Awesome. And everyone, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Pathways to Success podcast. As always, make sure to subscribe to the podcast. Share this out with everyone that you know. Tim just dropped a ton of value on us. Go buy his book, connect with him on social, and we'll see you next week on the next episode of the Pathways to Success.